Anyone think of any questions while you're on break? No? All right. Looks like we are missing somebody. Maybe Rebecca? All right. No, Rebecca. Hopefully she comes back. So we'll move on now to chapter 12. And chapter 12, we're going to look at the residence unit or the residence room, what you could expect to find there. All right. So looking at the residence room or shared room or wherever they are residing in your facility, making sure that their room is kept clean and comfortable helps to promote their health. When we're thinking about residents living in a facility, things that we need to be mindful of, the noise level in a facility is oftentimes a lot higher than the noise level was in their home. So we want to be aware of, banging meal trays around, not yelling down the hall to our coworkers, answering call lights quickly so that they're not constantly going off. Making sure that if there is a common area with like a television or radio and nobody is using those, that those are turned off. Also, making sure to respect resident wishes. If they want their door closed so it's more quiet in their room, make sure that we allow for them to have their door closed. Odors are another thing. We need to make sure that residents who are incontinent are cleaned up after any episode of incontinence and that we dispose of all of those incontinence items promptly so that there is no lingering smell. Emptying bedpans, bedside commodes, very important to get them emptied out and cleaned. Also, making sure that we are giving regular personal care and oral care to our residents so that they don't have body odor or bad breath. Making sure that the environment is comfortable. So OBRA actually has a temperature requirement for the main areas of all facilities. The main area of any facility has to be kept between 71 and 81 degrees Fahrenheit. If the resident wants their room to be warmer or colder than that, that is their choice. They have the right to make that decision. But the main areas of the facility have to fall within that range. Like I said, when residents get older, they have less of that subcutaneous or fat tissue. They're not as able to regulate temperature, so they may get cold. So dressing them in warmer clothing, layering bedding, giving them a blanket in their wheelchair if they're cold. So trying to keep them away from areas that would make them cold, like don't put them right in front of the air conditioner in their wheelchair, right? They're gonna freeze. So be aware of that. Also know that if they want to change the temperature in their room, they have the right to do that, and we would not change it back. We would allow for them to have it set at whatever they like. I had a gentleman in Jerry Psych who liked to have his room at like 86, and I would go in there and I was like, oh, every time I come in here, it feels like I'm in Florida. And he would start laughing. He's like, well, I'm cold. Okay. Well, hopefully at 86 degrees Fahrenheit, you're warm because I am roasting. Yeah, Irene?
If they have a roommate and the roommate's not like cold, how do you do that? What do you tell
That
them?
might need a room change if they're not agreeing on temperature.
Okay.
Usually, in general, older adults tend to be colder. We have a little guy who walks around our neighborhood, And he last week in the heat, I think I told you I live in Washington, and it's been 90, 95 degrees for the last 2 weeks. And in the heat, he's walking around in a long sleeve shirt with a vest on, like a fleece vest. And I see him walking around, and I'm like, is he gonna fall over and croak because of heat stroke? But he's probably cold. So I'm like, every time I see him, I'm like, is he moving? Is he still going? Is he like, red in the face? Is he okay? So most of the time, as the older adults are losing that subcutaneous tissue, they start to get cold. Their temperature usually sits around a lower normal than we would typically consider. Normal temperature for an adult would be 98.6. Usually their temperatures lay a little lower than that. So they're usually cold, but if they were one resident in the room hot and one cold, we might need to make a roommate swap. We might need to move them in with someone else who has the same temperature preference as they do. Good question. Other things we want to do to promote safety and comfort, make sure that the resident knows how to use the lights. Most facilities will have like motion activated lights in the bathroom. That way when the resident opens the bathroom door, the lights come on so that they don't have to try to like feel around on the wall for the light switch. Be aware that residents, since they are most comfortable with you, are probably going to voice any complaints that they might have to you. So complaints about the food or maybe about laundry service not being quick enough, those sorts of things, you're going to get those. Make sure that you let the resident know that you will pass that concern on to the nurse so that it can be addressed. Typically, what you would find in the resident's room, depending on the type of facility, they'll have some sort of bed. It might be a hospital-style bed. It might be just a standard bed. They'll usually have a bedside table. Usually that's where they keep like their phone, maybe a lamp, maybe their water pitcher, maybe their TV remote, maybe some personal care items. They'll also have an overbed table. The overbed table kind of depends on the resident. Some residents will use that for mealtime. Some residents use that like to get their makeup on in the morning. They'll have a call light, which we talked about. Some facilities will have the call light and emergency pull cords. A lot of times those emergency cords are located in the room and the bathroom. They'll have a privacy curtain. Especially if they're in a shared room, they should have a privacy curtain between the two residents. Important to know that the overbed table, like I said, usually used for mealtime, is not a place where we store things like bedpans, urinals, soiled briefs, because that surface is typically used for eating. So we need to make sure to be aware of where we are putting those soiled items. Every time you give care to residents, and I will keep saying this throughout the duration of our chapters, you need to make sure that you have provided as much privacy as possible. If the resident's in a shared room, pulling the privacy curtain, making sure the door is closed, also being aware of any windows or doors to outside, please pull the curtains or the blinds, provide privacy from every direction. We don't want a resident to be receiving a bed bath and have someone walk by the window and be able to see that resident. So just check your surroundings before you start that personal care. Anytime we are cleaning a resident's room, we need to make sure to follow those standard precautions, infection prevention measures. Remember, those most commonly touched surfaces can pass on lots of microorganisms between people. So think about equipment that needs to be maybe wiped down or cleaned after each use. Maybe the overbed table, right? If that's being used for mealtime, probably want to wipe it down before we give a meal tray, maybe after the meal tray is removed. Call light, another commonly touched thing, should be wiped down. Things like light switches, doorknobs, maybe anything that the resident's touching frequently, like the telephone, the TV remote. Any of those things should be wiped down every time we use them, every time we think about it. That way we're preventing the spread of microorganisms through direct contact. Make sure that everything in the resident's room is in good working order. If it's not, please report that to the nurse. Also, keep in mind if residents are eating meals in their room, there is a risk of pests or insects getting into that room if we don't promptly clean up that food. So please, after you deliver a meal tray, give the resident time to eat, come back and pick that meal tray up so that there's not food or crumbs sitting around for those pests or insects to be able to get in and eat. Keep resident water pitchers filled, restock their personal care supplies. If ever you grab the last incontinence brief, take care of the resident and then please make sure to go grab a new package of incontinence briefs. That way the next time the resident needs one, they're there. Follow facility policy as far as trash disposal and removal. Usually the nursing assistant is responsible for cleaning up trash in the room, bagging it up, taking it out to the appropriate receptacle. If you do see anything like ants or for some reason rats or something in the resident's room, please report that immediately. We had a resident who we didn't know was stashing food in the top drawer of their bedside table, and there was a trail of ants going up to the drawer and in the drawer, and I was so disgusted. I was like, oh my gosh, they're crawling around. I felt like they were going to crawl up onto my shoes and my legs, and it was so gross. So if you notice those things, make sure to get them reported so that hopefully the maintenance team can get that taken care of. Also, as we already talked about, treat resident belongings with respect. Make sure that you never take anything out of a resident room unless, of course, they ask you to. If they ask you to go grab them a scarf or a sweater, what have you, fine, do it. Otherwise, don't remove things from their room without their permission. Yeah, Irene?
If they say something's missing, how do you report that? You tell the nurse?
Yeah, I would report that to the nurse. The problem with missing things is sometimes it's like maybe it's in the laundry. If they're missing like their sweater, could potentially be in the laundry. So we want to try to check that first. Check through maybe their closet if they're looking for a sweater. Maybe look around, did they leave it in the bathroom or in the dining room? Try to check those places, but then, yeah, you would want to report it to the nurse. Yes. When I worked in the GeriSpsych facility, we had a really unfortunate situation. One of the housekeeping staff was taking resident possessions and belongings and taking them home for their own use. So those sorts of things do happen, though I wouldn't expect that to happen in a facility. It can happen. So if a resident says that things are missing, then yeah, we definitely want to try to find those things. And if we can't, we want to report that to the nurse so that that can be investigated and we can figure out where their things are going. Any other questions before we move on to sleep? Before I forget, I forgot to mention Module 2 exams should be fixed. So it should be able to be accessed again. I don't know what the problem was, but I had the school look into it while we were on break, and it is fixed now. So you should be able to take that one after class today if you haven't already. If you've already taken it, you don't need to retake it. All right, so moving on to sleep. When we talk about sleep, think about all the things that are going on in a facility that could potentially prevent someone from sleeping, noises, odors, right? All those things that we just talked about. So sleep is really important for many different aspects of our health. When a resident is sleeping, they are in their 24-hour day and night cycle. They are taking that time to rest not only their mental health, but also their physical health. So sleep is not only beneficial to our mental well-being, but also our physical well-being. Residents who don't get adequate sleep are not going to be able to properly heal. So if they have an infection, for example, it's going to prolong the healing. If a resident has difficulty sleeping, they may have a medical diagnosis that you might see in their care plan called insomnia. Insomnia is either the inability to fall asleep or the inability to remain asleep once you fall asleep. With facilities, residents oftentimes when they move in, like I said, they may be kind of fearful, uncertain, unsure what to expect, uneasy of the new situation. They may have difficulty sleeping. It could also be related maybe to their normal sleep-wake cycle. Residents who maybe worked the night shift their entire life, they might be awake at night and asleep all day. And that may just be their circadian rhythm. They are asleep in the day and they are awake at night. So, if that's the case, like I said, we may have to make sure that their room is maybe away from common areas during the day when people are most noisy. Could also be related to medication. There are some medications that have the side effect of insomnia. There are some residents who receive medications for insomnia to help them to sleep. So maybe they're not getting that medication or they've refused it. Like I said, with transfers, sometimes sharing a room with someone else, if that person snores, or maybe they have opposite sleep-wake cycles, that could potentially interrupt their sleep as well. So what do we do if residents aren't sleeping well? We want to try to figure out why. Maybe they're taking too many naps during the day and then they're not tired at night. Maybe they're having an afternoon coffee and that caffeine is keeping them up. Maybe they're confused about night versus day. This used to happen a lot in Jerry Psych. We'd have residents get up in the morning and put on pajamas. And it's like, no, it's time for the day. We put on day clothes. So that can be confusing for them. Maybe they're having a heavy snack or a heavy meal too late at night. Like I said, maybe medication. Maybe they're either refusing medication that they are prescribed for sleeping, or they're taking a medication that maybe has a side effect of insomnia. Maybe there's some sort of distraction, TVs, cell phones, computers, radios, loud noises in the hallway. Or maybe they're having pain. Maybe the pain is keeping them awake. What we would want to do if a resident is not sleeping well, try to figure out the cause and then report that to the nurse. If we can't figure out the cause, the nurse can do a further assessment and investigation on that. If we think we might have figured out the cause, we can report that to the nurse and maybe see, for example, if it's an afternoon cup of coffee, maybe we switch them to decaf in the afternoon. Then they don't have caffeine and hopefully that helps them to sleep. So we kind of have to troubleshoot that process. Any questions on sleep? Yeah, Irene?
When you're cleaning up a room, you're cleaning both.
I can only hear like every other word. I heard cleaning a room.
When you're cleaning your resident's room, are you cleaning for both, or the other person has like his own?
Usually if there's a shared room, you would be the nursing assistant for both residents in that room. So then you would be doing both sides. In some instances, that may be different. So whatever your assignment is, whatever residents you're assigned to, you would be responsible for cleaning up their spaces. All right, moving on to bed making. When I started CNA school, when I was 18, I didn't know that there was a right and wrong way to make a bed. Never heard of that before in my life. I was taught, as a child to make my bed every morning, and I did that. And I was taught to pull the sheets off and wash them, and I did that. But I had no idea that there was like a right and a wrong way to make a bed. Who knew? So there are a lot of different ways that we can make a bed. You'll be taught how to properly make a bed with what are called hospital corners when you're in clinical. You can make a bed with a resident in the bed. You can make a bed that is going to be closed up for the day. You can make a bed that is ready for the resident to get into. So there are a lot of different ways to make that bed. An occupied bed is the one that you would make with the resident in it. So why would you do this? Well, let's say it's the middle of the night. Resident has an episode of incontinence and the linens are soiled. Instead of get the Hoyer lift, get the resident up, get them into the wheelchair, take off the bedding, replace it, get the resident back in there, what you can do is you can just change the resident and the bedding while the resident remains in the bed. So we'll take a look at pictures of how to do this. You also get to practice in clinical. An unoccupied bed is just typical making a bed like you normally would. A closed bed is one where all the blankets are pulled up. An open bed is one where they're pulled down to the foot of the bed, ready for the resident to get in. And a surgical bed, usually not making this sort of bed unless you're in a hospital setting, but we'll look at that as well. Making a bed properly is very important for a few different reasons. Sheets that are put on that are left wrinkled or maybe damp or soiled with some sort of incontinence increase the resident risk of skin breakdown and infection. Microorganisms thrive inside the human body because it is a warm, moist environment. If an episode of incontinence is left in the bed, microorganisms are going to thrive there as well. So very important that we make the bed properly, that we check to make sure there are no wrinkles. Every time we are getting a resident out of bed or before we put them in bed, we're checking to make sure that there is no sign of an incontinence episode, no soiled linens. I mentioned this before when we were talking about infection prevention, but it's really important if you're taking off dirty linens to, of course, wear gloves, but to change those gloves and wash your hands and apply a new pair of gloves before you touch the clean linens. So if you're going from dirty to clean, you need to take off the gloves, clean your hands, and apply new gloves before you ever touch the clean. Also, residents like to do weird things, like store their dentures under their pillow, store their jewelry under their pillow. So check the dirty linens before you put them into the laundry. So when you're taking off the pillowcase, take it off, set the pillow down, make sure that there's nothing in the pillowcase. Before you crumble up all of the bed linens together, look, make sure that there's no dentures, hearing aids, jewelry, etc. in the bed linens. Same thing as we talked about for the gown. When you're removing dirty linens, you want to fold that dirty part inside so that it's not coming into contact with you, your uniform, etc. Please make sure that you do not shake linens. Any microorganisms present on the linens are then going to be airborne. So when you are removing linens, just carefully remove them, fold them up, dirtiest part inside, and get them bagged up. Anything soiled should be bagged at the point of origin. So wherever you're taking it off of, you need to put it in a bag before you leave the room. Make sure that when you are carrying things that are soiled, that they're not touching your uniform. If there is no way to avoid that, put on a gown first so that the gown is touching the soiled linens, not you. Also, please make sure when you are dealing with clean linens, clean clothes, etc., you be aware of where you're setting them. One time we had CNAs training in the Jerry Psych facility, and one of the nursing assistants was really close to taking their state exam, and she came in and she removed the dirty linen, she bagged them up, she took off her gloves, washed her hands, got clean gloves, went and grabbed the clean linens, came into the room, and set them on the floor. Ew, right? Do you want to sleep in bed sheets that have been set on the floor? No. Yuck. So be aware of where you're putting those things. If you need to, wipe down the overbed table and set them there. Also be aware of things that are reusable versus disposable. One thing that happens a lot is facilities will have disposable draw sheets or chucks pads and reusable draw sheets or chuck pads. Know what's disposable versus reusable. If the thing is disposable, please throw it away. Don't run it through the laundry. It's going to make a mess. So making an occupied bed, like I said, you'll learn how to do this with what are called hospital corners. That is the right way to make a bed, pulling everything tight so that there are no wrinkles. You'll get to see this in clinical, so you don't need to worry too much about it right now. We're just going to look through these for the pictures. Making an occupied bed, like I said, you can make the bed with the resident in there. How you do this is you have the dirty linens on one side, clean linens on the other. Best way to do this is if you can have 2 nursing assistants in the room to perform this procedure. That way one of you is touching the dirty stuff and one of you touching the clean. You basically just roll your resident, log roll them onto the side. You roll the dirty linens up under them. The clean linens then get pushed up and put under the resident while the dirty linens get removed at the other side. You log roll your resident over to the other side and they're on clean linens. So it's easy to do, a lot easier than to get them out of the bed, especially if it's like the middle of the night, and have to transfer them. And here is a good example for you. Like I said, you don't want to shake linens. So one thing, I don't know about you, but probably like the biggest mistake that I make when making a bed is when you get the pillowcase on and you just like shake the pillow so the pillow goes into the case, right? Don't do that in a healthcare setting because we don't want to get microorganisms from the dirty pillowcase onto the clean surfaces or from the air onto the clean pillowcase. So the best way to do it is actually to turn the pillowcase inside out, grab the inside of the pillowcase and the pillow, and then pull the pillowcase over the pillow. I don't care if you do that at home. I personally like to just shake my pillow until it falls into the pillowcase and then I feel accomplished. But in the healthcare setting, please don't do that. Making an unoccupied bed, like I said, is essentially just like making your bed in the morning. And then a surgical bed, which you probably won't see unless you're in an acute care, like hospital setting. Surgical bed, essentially all this means is that the covers are actually pulled over to the side. That way, when we roll the stretcher up to the side of the bed, the resident can get into the bed and we can pull the covers over the top of them. So it just makes it easier to cover them once they're transferred into that bed. Questions on bed making? Yeah, Irene?
If the clean sheets end up touching the dirty sheets, do we have to like get brand new ones?
For making an occupied bed, it's a little bit more difficult to keep the clean from touching the dirty. The one thing to keep in mind is you want to roll those dirty sheets so the dirty part is inside. That way the clean sheets are only touching the essentially non-dirty surface of those sheets. So you're rolling all that stuff up inside of that dirty sheet. Yeah. And then best if you can have one person on either side. So one person who's touching the dirty stuff, one person who's touching the clean stuff, and then you can get that clean sheet rolled under, resident pulled over while the other nursing assistant gathers up all the dirty and gets it backed up. That tends to work pretty well. I see you, Rebecca. Any other questions before we move on to chapter 13? All right. So now we're going to get into personal care skills, those ADLs we've been talking about. Watch some videos on those. And then we will also start on vital signs. So getting into what we call basic nursing tasks. Starting out with chapter 13 on ADLs or personal care skills. Looking at taking care of residents. Remember, we talked about holistic care. We talked about not only taking care of the physical aspects, but also emotional and social aspects. So today, the care we're focusing on is going to be that physical care, those ADLs. So bathing, eating, eliminating, transferring, all of those physical care skills. A couple terms to be aware of. Hygiene, that just means keeping our body clean and healthy. Grooming typically refers to things like taking care of the hair, the fingernails. ADLs, we already went over what that is, activities of daily living. And perineal care, we referred to earlier as well. This is care of the genital and anal area. Perennial care is also abbreviated peri-care. So if you hear peri-care, same thing. So not everyone is going to follow this exact routine. It kind of depends on the setting, but typical morning care, when we go in to get a resident up, we usually help them get to the bathroom. We want to help them to wash their face and their hands, assist them with grooming, hair care, getting dressed, maybe shaving, and then also assisting them with mouth care. One thing with mouth care, brushing the teeth, is you want to check with your resident. Do they want their teeth brushed before breakfast or after? Personally, I would prefer to taste my coffee the way it should be, not with a minty toothpaste essence in my mouth. So if you asked me, I would tell you I would like my teeth brushed after breakfast. Some residents want their teeth brushed before, and that is fine. So check on preference there. Evening care is essentially similar to or the same as morning care. Usually at night, we assist with elimination, help them wash their face, their hands, assist them with oral care, get them changed into night clothes. Nighttime, you may be offering a snack before bed. You may be offering to give a back rub for relaxation. Kind of depends on the situation. One thing to keep in mind with all personal care tasks is, like I said before, we want to maintain the resident's independence as much as possible. So, no matter what the task, as long as the resident is safe to do the task, no matter how long it takes them, we want to allow them that independence to do that task. Be aware of preferences and routines. So, you should have some idea for each resident when they like to go to bed. If they're supposed to be receiving a shower, do they usually want that before dinner, after dinner, closer to bedtime? Make sure that you're observing residents during personal care. Remember, this is the best time, the best opportunity for you to make any observations about any changes that might need to be reported to the nurse. Whenever you leave a resident in their room, they should have their call light. And before you ever leave a resident room, please do a scan around the whole room. Make sure it's left neat and tidy. One of the biggest complaints that we used to get in the GeriSeg facility was family members would come in, let's say 11 a.m., and we would have usually gotten the residents up at 7:30, gotten them to breakfast at 8. Breakfast is usually finished by 9, and then maybe they went to activities or what have you. And family would come in around 11 in preparation to have lunch with their loved one, and the room would still be a mess. Like the bed's not made, there's trash on the floor. That was our biggest complaint. So before you ever leave a room, please just look around, make sure there's no trash needing to be taken out, make sure the bed is pulled up and made, blinds are open, there's no foul odors in the room. Just make sure it looks nice. Remember that during your providing of personal care, not only are you providing that care, maybe brushing their teeth or helping them to ambulate or transfer, but you also want to interact with them, right? It's going to be really awkward if you just go into the room and you're like, all right, well, it's time to get up. So you just start, helping them get their shirt on and you're not saying anything. Help you get their shoes on and then you start brushing their hair, right? That's going to be awkward. So this is the best time really to engage with them on that other level, that social and emotional level. Ask them how they're doing, make observations. Is there anything new or unusual that you think you might need to report to the nurse? This is a great time to find that out. During personal care, we've already talked about all sorts of things that you would want to report to the nurse. So any changes, basically. And if you're not sure if it's a change, maybe this is your Monday and you were gone for the last couple days, and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is new or not. It's better to be safe than sorry. Just report it to the nurse. If it's something that they already knew about, fine. If not, then they would be able to go and assess that at that time. Yeah, Jeffrey? Yeah, good question. So it depends on your facility. Some facilities will have tablets that you can use to take a picture of something like a bruise or a wound or whatever you see. Some facilities, no. So if your facility provides you with something to take a picture and that is approved in your facility, that is okay, then yes. If not, you would never want to take a picture like with your own personal cell phone or tablet. Very good question. The Jerry Psych facility that I worked in, they did not believe in electronics. We still had paper charting. They actually just switched over 2 years ago to electronic health records. So we had paper charting and we did not take pictures. My personal thoughts on that topic are I can describe something to you as much as I want, right? I can tell you it's about 3 inches long by, 2 inches deep and it's red and it's draining. But all of that stuff only can paint so much of a picture in your head, right? If I take a picture of it and I show you, that gives you a lot more information. That also shows a lot more progress. If we're looking at a wound, for example, and we have a picture every day, we can tell, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? So in my opinion, I think that the tablets that they give in facilities for documentation and things like that, taking pictures, are beneficial for the residents to hopefully promote that healing. But not all facilities have that same belief. So some facilities might not have that availability, in which case you would just have to describe it as best you can. Just never take a picture. It is a violation of HIPAA for you to take a picture with your own personal phone in a facility that includes any identifying information for residents, that includes with the residents themselves or any of their names or personal information. So don't do that. Any other questions before we talk about pressure injuries? All right. Moving on to skin issues or pressure injuries. So pressure points I've been referencing for the last few days. These are areas of our body that bear a lot of its weight. Pressure points, for example, when we're sitting down, our buttock, right? That is where all the pressure from our entire body is resting. Bony prominences are areas of the body where the bone lies close to the skin and doesn't have a lot of extra protection between the bone and the skin. So for example, do me a favor and look at your elbow. So mine's covered by a sweatshirt, but if you tap on your elbow, there's a bone and skin right there, right? There's no like muscle, there's no fatty protection. That is a bony prominence. So those are areas that are at a higher risk for skin breakdown than other areas of our body, just due to the fact that the bone is so close to the surface of the skin with no protection. Pressure injuries have, 3 or 4 or 5 different names that they can be called just to make things confusing. So a pressure injury is the same as a pressure ulcer, is the same as a pressure sore, is the same as a bed sore, which is the same as a decubitus ulcer. Those are all names for the same thing. A pressure injury is caused by deterioration of the skin or shearing. So remember when we talked about skin and bone going in opposite directions, that can lead to a pressure injury. Foot drop and orthotic devices we will come back to. I want you to know with pressure injuries, once they start, they are really difficult to heal. Also, if they heal, there is a higher chance that that area will develop another pressure injury in the future. They're also really painful, right? Because we have all of our nerve endings in our skin. When that skin's integrity is interrupted and a wound forms, that causes the resident a lot of pain. When we have any non-intact skin, that increases our risk for infection as well, right? If our skin is broken, that protective barrier is not there to protect anything from getting in. So the best thing that we can do for pressure injuries is to prevent them from happening in the first place. So looking at what we call pressure injury danger zones. So these are bony prominences, and you're looking at different positions and what the bony prominences that would be at risk for breakdown are. So looking, for example, at the supine position. In a supine position, where the pressure is resting on these bony prominences is where that skin is most likely to break down. Huge ones for the supine position, depending on the subcutaneous layers of your resident, if they're really thin and they don't have a lot of subcutaneous tissue, shoulder blades, elbows, the buttock, between the kneecaps and the heels are all areas that can very easily break down. So pay attention to that when you get your resident repositioned. Make sure that we're supporting all of those bony prominences with pillows or other positioning or support devices. In addition to prevention, the observation of our residents is the next best thing. So if we start to notice that maybe a pressure ulcer is forming or there's like a discoloration to the skin, we would want to report that to the nurse as soon as possible so that we can prevent it from getting worse. So pressure injuries go by stage. So I don't expect you to know or to be able to look at a wound and tell me what stage it is. That is not necessary. But I just want to give you an idea of if you see something on a resident, what you might be looking at. So a stage 1 pressure injury, the skin is still intact. This is typically, we would look at the skin and maybe it's a little bit red or it's a different color than the surrounding tissue. When we say that, think about like your elbow, like we said. If you set your elbow on a hard surface for 5 minutes, it's probably going to look a little red when you pick it up, right? If that redness does not go away once you remove the pressure from the area, that is where we start to consider it a pressure injury. If that redness remains even though the pressure has been removed. A lot of times residents will report pain as well. These areas start to cause them pain when that skin is starting to break down. Let me find you a picture of a stage 1. Here we go. So this, you can see that red area, that would be a stage 1. So stage 1 pressure injury, the skin's not open, right? It just looks like redness, but that redness is not resolving when we reposition the resident. So very important that we would report that to the nurse so that the nurse can put additional measures in place to help that heal and prevent it from getting worse. Moving on to stage 2. Stage 2 is when we actually start to see the skin break. So there is partial thickness skin loss. Usually this looks almost like a blister or like a blister that has popped. So you can see like pink or red shiny skin underneath. And that typically, it almost looks like if you popped a blister and took off the top layers of the skin. It looks kind of moist and red pink. So the skin is not intact, right? The skin is broken, but it is not very deep. So what that looks like is this, if it will share. Come on. I'll just show you this picture. This is half decent. It's not a real patient, but for reasons of HIPAA, we oftentimes don't get a lot of real patient pictures on the internet. But this one will show the rest of the stages. So stage 2, as you can see here in the little square on the right there, stage 2 is actually going down into the skin. So that skin is now open. You can see it kind of looks like a blistered area. What the problem is with that is a lot of times the stage 2 pressure injury is mistaken for a blister. Blisters heal. Stage 2 pressure injuries are just ultimately going to get worse if we don't treat them. So if you're ever unsure, just report it to the nurse. The nurse can assess it and either say, oh, it's just a blister, we'll watch for it to heal, or yeah, it is actually a stage 2 pressure injury and we need to start treating it. Stage 3 is full thickness skin loss, so that goes down to the fat layer. You can see that subcutaneous layer. There can also be dead tissue present in this type of injury, so that dead tissue is also known as necrotic tissue. Typically, necrotic tissue starts to look like a brown or black color. So you can see it a little bit in this picture. You can see at the bottom there's kind of that brown discoloration. And then the worst stage is a stage 4. So that is going from stage 1 to stage 4, getting worse. Stage 4 would be like the maximum level of worseness, if that makes sense. Stage 4 is full thickness. It extends all the way down through all layers of the skin. Oftentimes you can see bone, muscle, tendons, ligaments, etc. It looks like a deep crater. And again, usually you can see that dead or necrotic tissue. So you can see in this picture of the stage 4, you can see all the way down to the bone layer there. One thing to keep in mind with the stage 4 pressure injury is this is the worst category that we have for this, the worst stage. So these can range from something like, this big to something like this big. So the biggest stage 4 that I've ever seen when I worked in home health as a nurse doing wound care was one that was on a gentleman's coccyx, which is the buttock area. And lucky for him, he was a quadriplegic and he didn't have feeling in the area. So what happened was he lived at home with his spouse. And since he didn't have any feeling, he was able to use his arms a little bit to reposition himself. He didn't know he had developed a wound until his wife could not figure out what smelled so bad in the room. It was his wound. So by the time that the wound was detected, it was already a stage 4. Also, with quadriplegia, the lack of feeling and circulation in that area doesn't allow for it to heal. So that wound was receiving care multiple times per week. The care that was being provided to that wound required cleaning it out. In order to clean that wound out, I had to put on a sterile glove that went all the way from my fingertips to my elbow. Had to get gauze with sterile water and reach inside of that wound and wipe it out. So it was large enough for me to fit my hand in there and spin my hand around and clean it. That sort of wound has a very, very minimal chance of ever healing. So you can see why prevention, observation are so important in order to keep these residents' skin intact. Yeah, Irene?
The cause of that is due to like neglect or
Just
what?
pressure,
Just
repeated pressure.
so like if you don't move them a certain, like they'll get it.
Yeah, if you don't follow the care plan instructions on repositioning and propping up bony prominences with pillows, then yes, those sorts of injuries will occur. Good question. So we talked about the skin yesterday, and we talked about things that you would want to observe for. If your resident does not have a known wound and you notice something like redness or non-intact skin, make sure that that gets reported. If they do have a known wound and something is looking like it has changed, you want to report that to the nurse as well. When we're providing care to the resident's skin, we want to make sure that the skin is always left clean and dry. Clean because infection, dry because moisture breeds bacteria. Follow the care plan for repositioning. Most common rule of thumb is repositioning every 2 hours for residents who are in bed. Like I said, it's more frequent if they're in a wheelchair. Make sure that if your resident is incontinent, you check them frequently, check their incontinence brief, check their clothing, check their bedding, make sure it's all clean and dry. Avoid scratching resident skin. So if they're like, oh, can you get this itch over here? You can kind of rub the area, but don't actually scratch the area with your nails. You will cause harm to their fragile skin. You can massage resident skin, like give them a back rub, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Unless they have some sort of either not intact skin or skin that appears discolored compared to the surrounding tissue. So if there's any indication that they might have the start of a pressure injury, we do not want to massage that skin. Yeah, Samantha?
Question. So I was a vet tech, and the animals, they could get urine scald. That was kind of like if they were on a certain point of their, like if they hadn't been like turned and they were sitting in their urine for a long time. Can people get that where it like becomes like a burn on the body? Like if they were in, like on top of like one of these wounds?
Yeah, definitely, especially depending on the composition of the urine. That can definitely occur. I am so thankful for people like you who are vet techs because honestly, my dog gets a little boo-boo and I lose my mind. I don't know what to do with the dog. I'm like, I do people. I call the vet. I'm like, people are all for me, but not animals. What do I do with this dog? And it's a lot of times it's silly little things. Luckily, the most recent thing that we have been dealing with one of our dogs is he got into something. We think it was in a field that we took him to play, and he has ringworm. So I can easily deal with ringworm. I know you get clotrimazole cream, you put it on there twice a day, and it goes away. So we've been putting it on him for 2 weeks, and it's getting better. So that was like my first success with animals, taking care of something without going to the vet. Heck yes. But yes, that can happen. Depending on the composition of that urine, the urine can burn the skin. Usually what happens with people is since they're kind of just laying then in that wet urine or that feces, the skin starts to break down and can become infected very easily. Yeah, good question. I always thought if there was like another career I was going to do, it would be really fun to learn about other species and to take care of other species, but also when my dogs get hurt, I'm a hot mess. I'm like, oh no, what am I gonna do? So probably not the best career for me. But yeah, very similar. A lot of things are very similar. All right. So in addition to providing care to the skin, making sure we're repositioning, keeping it clean and dry, we also, like I mentioned yesterday, want to be very careful with transfers. If we bump a resident into something, the chances of their skin tearing are very high. Their skin is fragile. It can be very easy to cause an interruption to that intact skin. Also, if residents have skin folds, make sure that you are opening the skin fold, cleaning and fully drying it. If not, that is a great place that yeast likes to grow. So we can get fungal yeast infection in that area, which is then painful for the resident as well. Try to keep resident skin away from surfaces like plastic and rubber. One of the most common things that I see is when we're transferring a resident into a wheelchair and we get them transferred, the back of their wheelchair is usually like a plasticky material. If you don't carefully pull their shirt down in the back, that skin on the back of the wheelchair can cause a lot of irritation and skin breakdown. So make sure that their clothing is fully covering their back in that wheelchair. Again, linens need to be kept clean and wrinkle-free. We need to make sure that we are using draw sheets to move residents up in bed. Make sure that any bony prominence is being protected when we reposition. Again, there are a lot of different devices that can be used, pillows, different types of wedges and cushions. There's a device called a bed cradle that is used to keep the sheets off the top of the toes. I'll show you a picture of one here in a second. And then, of course, like I mentioned a few times now, if your resident's in a wheelchair, they need to be repositioned more frequently than they would need to be if they were in bed. Couple, aside from the wound I already told you about, a couple of the worst wounds I have ever seen have been on the top of the toes. Reason that we get wounds on the top of the toes is typically from pressure from the blankets that are covering the resident. So here is an example of what's called a bed cradle. So this device, they're usually wire or PVC, and they just wrap around the foot area of the bed, and then you pull the sheets up over the top. So there's no pressure sitting on top of the toes. Wounds on the top of the toes, since those are bony prominences and there's not a lot of cushion between the skin and the bone, they're very hard to heal. They can also get pretty deep and infected quickly. So again, prevention, very important. If your resident has some sort of lotion, cream, ointment, powder that gets applied to their skin, know your facility's policy. Some facilities will allow nursing assistants to put these things on. Some facilities will not. They are considered a medication and have to be done by the nurse. So know the rules. If you are putting things on your residents, make sure that you know per the care plan how to put it on, where to put it on. Also, please make sure that you wash your hands and wear gloves. Make sure that after you apply it, you give it time to sit on the skin, or make sure it is fully rubbed into the skin, dependent upon the instructions. Be aware of things like ointments and creams. They can stain clothing, so try not to get them on your clothing or the residents. And if there's anything unclear about the instructions for application, just ask the nurse before you proceed to put it on. I want you to keep in mind that anything that we put on a resident, we don't necessarily want to put on ourselves. So always put a glove on before you touch the ointment or the powder or the lotion. If there's, for some reason, you find a pill in your facility, please put on a glove before you touch that pill. When we touch things with our bare skin, those things can absorb into our skin. And typically, we don't want whatever medication or cream or ointment the resident is using. So please be aware of that. Same thing with cleaners. There are cleaners that have a lot of very toxic things in them that if we touch them with our skin, they can start to absorb into our system. A lot of cleaners you'll see, especially those that are used to kill things like C. diff, there's a warning on them that they can actually cause infertility issues. So think about the things you're touching, put gloves on before you touch them. Be familiar with what sorts of positioning devices your facility has. Some facilities just use pillows because they have an abundance of them. They're easy to use. Some facilities use special types of positioning wedges. Just make sure you know how to use the thing. If your facility is using anything for like hand rolls or protective boots for heels, make sure that those are specific to each resident. They're usually fitted for those devices. Some residents, for example, in Geri Psych, they would need hand rolls. A hand roll essentially is something to help their hand to stay open so we can do that range of motion. We would roll up a washcloth and put it in their hand, and that was fine for a hand roll. So just know what your facility uses and how to utilize the equipment available to you. Any questions on any of that? All right, moving on to bathing. If you're ever doubting yourself or your abilities, remember that all of these different things that you are going to be assisting residents with, you probably already assist yourself with. And if you have children, you probably do these things or have done these things for your children. I had a nursing assistant who we hired in Geri Psych come up to me, and she said, I have to give this resident a shower today. And I know we went over the steps of this when I was in CNA school, but I've never given someone a shower. And I said, do you take showers? And she was like, well, yeah. And I was like, okay, so the steps are the same, essentially. You're just going to be doing it for someone else. And it was like a light bulb went off in her head. She was like, oh, yeah, I can do that. So remember, you already brush your own teeth, your own hair, you take a shower or a bath, right? You eat, you go to the bathroom, you get up and walk. You know how to do all these things. So be confident in your ability to do those things and trust your training. I promise you can do them. So when we talk about bathing, usually bathing for residents, like I said, due to the fragility and dryness of their skin, it's usually a couple times a week, not every day. On days when residents don't receive a full bath or shower, we give them a partial bath. So we clean the areas of their body that are most likely to be odorous or potentially get infected. That includes their face, their hands, their underarms or armpits, and their perineal area, so that genital and anal area. Another term for the armpits or underarms is the axilla. So if you hear that term, it means the same thing. As far as bathing goes, bathing does a lot more than just clean the body. It helps to promote relaxation. Important to follow the bathing schedule in your facility. Also to follow resident preference, right? Do they want a bath in the morning or in the evening? Do they prefer a bath or a shower? Make sure that when you are giving baths or showers, you know how your resident transfers. Also their ability. So do they need help shampooing their hair? Can they do anything independently for that bath or shower? What supplies do you need? Maybe the resident takes a shower, but they need to sit down. There's a device called a shower chair. So we want to know how to use that device. We also want to make sure that before we ever put a resident into a bathtub or shower, the resident has everything that they need. You never want to walk out of the bathroom and leave a resident unattended in the bathtub or shower. That's a safety hazard, right? It's a slippery environment. They could potentially fall. So we want to make sure everything is available to them before we get started. Like I said, if you're moving from a dirty area to a clean area, like the perineal area to hair care, please change your gloves, wash your hands. If you leave soap on the skin, that can also lead to breakdown. So make sure the skin is fully washed off with the water, and then the skin is fully dried before we try to put on clothing. Usually with bath water, residents, we want to make sure that the water is comfortable. We would check it first and then have the resident check it. That way, if it's way too hot, we can be like, oh, yikes, turn on some cold water. Make sure that it's comfortable to you first and then to the resident before you actually put the entire resident into there. So if a resident is unable to get in the shower or use a shower chair or get into the bath, we may give them what's called a bed bath. You will get to see a video on this. You'll also get to practice this in clinical. So let me pull up. Yeah, actually, we'll wait to watch that video. We'll watch it at the end. Going through pericare during the bath as well. So we'll watch that video here in a minute. Like I said yesterday, when we were talking about the urinary system and the structures of the urinary system, talking about how the female urethra is shorter than the male urethra. To prevent infection from occurring in a female resident, we need to make sure when we're providing pericare that we are wiping from front to back. The most common cause of infection in a female for UTI is called E. coli. E. coli comes from the stool in the rectum. So the most common cause essentially of a UTI is not properly wiping from front to back. So very, very important when we are providing pericare. Make sure anytime the resident is not receiving a bath to a specific area of their body, that area is covered. So for example, if you're giving a bed bath and you're working on cleaning the right arm, make sure that all of their limbs are covered. We want to keep them warm. We also want to make sure that they have privacy. Giving a back rub, it's not a scientific procedure. Just be gentle. If you want, you can wear gloves. If there's no open skin or reason that you would believe you would be exposed to bodily fluid, you don't have to wear gloves. Be gentle when you're massaging a resident. Please don't try to give them a deep tissue massage. You're probably going to cause injury. So it's just some sort of relaxing back rub, like upward and outward motions. You don't have to be a professional massage therapist for it. Shampooing hair. A lot of times the older ladies like to have their hair shampooed frequently. In the Jury Psych facility, I lucked out because we had a salon where the ladies would go to get their hair shampooed. But there are other ways we can do this as well. One of those ways is in the sink. There's also a little device that we can use in the bed. This one looks like it blows up and then it has water and you can do the soap right there in the bed. So that works as well. Be careful when you are shampooing anyone's hair. You don't want to be too rough. You don't want to pull the hair. Also a good time to observe the scalp if there's any non-intact skin, drainage, missing hair, anything like that to report to the nurse. As far as bathing goes, most facilities have common areas with a couple showers throughout the facility and a couple of bathtubs. Make sure that you clean the shower or tub before and after use. That way there's no germs from the previous individual who was bathed or showered. Be familiar with your facility's policy for bathing. Most facilities that I have worked in have been the resident, no matter how independent they are, is not to be left alone. So you need to remain in the room. That doesn't mean that they need to have the shower curtain open. You can pull the shower curtain closed and then just stand by in case they need help or some sort of event happens. Residents should have safety bars in the shower no matter what. Most facilities have this. It's an ADA requirement. Always use approved facility products. So don't bring anything from outside, shampoos, soaps, lotions, etc. Make sure that we're using the products supplied by the facility or by the resident. Reason for that is usually like allergies, skin allergies to things. Here's what a shower chair looks like. Usually they're made out of metal or PVC. What's nice about a shower chair is it has locking wheels. It also has like a little commode. So if you have a resident that's incontinent, you can leave that commode in place until you are ready to clean the genital area. You can remove that commode, clean everything up, rinse it off, and then put the commode back in there. That way, if they do urinate or have a bowel movement in the shower, it is contained. Any questions on bathing? All right, let me find the video. And I want to show you. Here we go. Modified bed bath, skills video 11. We will go ahead and watch this one to give you an idea.
Hi, Ms. Bragg. My name is Betsy. I'm your nursing assistant today, and I need to do a partial bed bath this morning.
Privacy is provided with a curtain, screen, or door.
Right, privacy. All right here. Wash my hands. Okay, first, we're going to get your gown off here, so I want you to hold on to that sheet for me. Hold on to that sheet. I'm going to pull your gown up underneath.
The client's gown is removed and placed in soiled linen container while avoiding overexposure of the client. Before washing, checks water temperature for safety and comfort, and asks client to verify comfort of water.
Wash my hands.
Clean gloves are put on before washing the client.
Okay. First, you're gonna wash your face. With the soap.
A critical step,
Start with your eyes.
beginning with eyes, washes eyes with wet washcloth, no soap, using a different area of the washcloth for each stroke, ensuring they wash from inner aspect to outer aspect,
Do the rest of your face.
then proceeds to wash the remainder of their face.
Dry your face.
The candidate dries the client's face with towel.
And your arm here. Get your arm straight for me. Here.
Exposing one arm, a towel is placed underneath the arm. Soap is applied to a wet washcloth.
Start at the top.
The candidate then washes arm, hand, and last, underarm, keeping the rest of the body covered.
And raise your arm for me. Good.
The candidate will then rinse and dry the arm, hand, and lastly, the underarm.
Rinsed off.
All the while, the candidate ensures the body is moved gently and naturally, avoiding force and overextension of limbs and joints.
Put your arm down. Right up here. Put your arm down. Put a clean yellow on your hair.
A clean gown is put on the client.
Get it tucked under her shoulders. What's that? Get it tucked under the shoulders. Get it tucked under the shoulders.
The basin is then emptied, with the contents going into the bedside commode or toilet. The wash basin is rinsed, with those contents also going into the toilet or bedside commode. The basin is then dried. After rinsing and drying basin, it is placed in the designated dirty supply area. After placing basin in designated dirty supply area and disposing of used linen, removes and disposes of gloves into waste container.
That is locked. That is low. The privacy curtain.
Signaling device is within reach and bed is in low position.
Wash my hands, and this goes complete.
All right. So there is a modified bed bath, just washing part of the residence. And then Also wanted to show this one, which is Pericare for a female mannequin resident.
Hi, Mr. Bragg. My name's Betsy. I'm your nursing assistant today, and I'm here to do some perineal care on you.
Privacy is provided with a curtain, screen, or door.
Right, privacy. Call in here. Wash my hand. Oh, sorry. Get set up here.
Before washing, the candidate checks the water temperature for safety and comfort. We do this using our elbow to ensure easy donning of gloves later in the skill. The client is then asked to verify the comfort of the water.
Okay, I'm gonna wash my hands.
The candidate puts on clean gloves before washing the perineal area. The perineal area is exposed while avoiding overexposure of client. A pad or linen protector is placed under the perineal area before washing. Soap is applied to a wet washcloth. A critical step, the genital area is washed, moving from the front of the body to the back, using a clean area of the washcloth for each stroke. Another critical step, using a clean washcloth, soap is rinsed from the genital area, moving from the front of the body to the back of the body, using a clean area of the washcloth for each stroke. The genital area is then dried, moving from front to back with a towel.
I'm gonna get you to turn on your side here.
Another critical step, after washing the genital area, the client is turned to one side. The candidate then washes and rinses the rectal area, moving from the front of the body to the back of the body, using a clean area of the washcloth for each stroke. The client is then dried with a towel.
Go ahead and come on back.
The client is repositioned. The candidate then empties, rinses, and dries the basin, with the contents being placed in a bedside commode or toilet. After rinsing and drying the basin, it is placed in the designated dirty supply area. The candidate ensures used linen has been disposed of into soiled linen container and disposes of linen protector appropriately. The candidate removes and disposes of gloves and washes hands.
Make sure the bed's locked and low. Open the curtain.
The candidate ensures the signaling device is within reach and the bed is in low position.
Wash my hands again, and the skill's complete.
All right. Any questions on bed bath or female pericare? Of course, you'll get to practice things like this in clinical, so don't worry too much if you're like, I can't remember all the steps. That's okay. Just want to show you what we're talking about. All right, we will go ahead then and take our second 15-minute break, so feel free to mute your microphone, turn off your camera, and I will see you back in 15 minutes.